The year is 2018. The room is all reclaimed barnwood and Edison bulbs. A man named Julian Vance sits at a polished oak table. He runs one of the most respected craft distilleries in the country. In front of him are 3 glass jars. Each jar is filled with corn kernels. 2 are a familiar uniform yellow. They are number 2 yellow dent corn, the industry standard. The 3rd jar is different. The kernels are not uniform. They are shades of deep red, almost purple. Some are a creamy white, a few are a startling blue. The lab report sits next to the jars. Julian slides it closer. He reads the numbers again. Protein content, starch content, oil content. He looks at the line for sugar profile. He stops. He reads it a 3rd time. Then he closes his eyes. Someone in the room speaks. Is it good? Julian doesn't answer right away. He just taps the glass jar with the strange, colorful corn. He says, "Where did you get this?" The sourcing agent clears his throat. A small farm, up north. A woman named Sarah Thorne, been growing it for 30 years. Just this, nothing else. The agent hesitates. He says, "The local co-op won't even take it. They have a name for it." Julian opens his eyes. What do they call it? Junk corn. Julian Vance went silent. The kind of silence that makes a whole room hold its breath. He pushed the 2 jars of yellow corn to the side. He pulled the jar of junk corn to the center of the table. He said, "I want to meet her. I want to buy everything she has. And I want to know why a woman would grow junk for 30 years. Because this report says this isn't junk. This is treasure." 30 years before that meeting, a young woman was told her life's work was worthless. She was told it with kindness. She was told it with concern. And that is the most dangerous way to be told you cannot do something. This channel exists to tell stories just like that one. Stories of quiet persistence. Stories about the people who were told no, and who spent decades turning that no into a legacy. If you believe those stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Join a community that honors the long game. Because what happened to Sarah Thorne is a lesson in how the world defines value, and how a single person can prove the world wrong. It just takes a lifetime. Let's go back to 1988, a hard year. The farm economy was on its knees. Interest rates were brutal. Commodity prices were in the tank. Sarah Thorne was 24 years old. She stood in the yard of her family's farm, a farm that had been in her family for 4 generations. 160 acres of dark, rich soil. Her father, Thomas Thorne, had died that spring. A heart that had worked too hard for too long. He left her the land. He left her the debt. And he left her his journals. Thomas was a different kind of farmer. He had a degree in botany. He read books about soil science for fun. He talked about mycelial networks before anyone knew what they were. His neighbors thought he was eccentric, smart, but not practical. He was always experimenting, saving seeds, crossing old varieties, trying to breed corn that tasted like corn used to taste. He wasn't chasing yield. He was chasing flavor. He was chasing resilience. He filled dozens of notebooks with his observations, drawings of root systems, charts of rainfall, notes on pollination. And on the last page of his final journal, he had written a single sentence. He wrote, "The dirt remembers what we have forgotten." Sarah held that journal in her hands. The weight of it felt like the weight of the farm itself. The bank owned most of it. The equipment was old. The house needed a new roof. She had a choice. Sell the land to the big corporate farm next door, pay off the debt, start a new life. Or she could stay. She could try to make it work. She opened the journal. His last entries were all about one specific variety, an open-pollinated flint corn. He called it Crimson King, a name he made up himself. It was a cross he'd been working on for a decade. Deep red kernels, high in oil, high in protein, resistant to drought. But it had a problem. The yield was low, barely 100 bushels to the acre. The new hybrids everyone else was planting, they were hitting 200, 225. His corn was beautiful. It was nutritious. It was tough. But by the standards of 1988, it was junk. Sarah walked out to the small test plot behind the barn. The corn was tall, taller than she was. The stalks were thick and sturdy. The ears were heavy in her hand. She pulled one from the stalk. She peeled back the husk. The kernels shone like dark jewels in the afternoon sun. Red, purple, mottled white. She thought about her father's last words. The dirt remembers. She made a decision, a quiet decision. She would not sell. She would not plant the high-yield hybrid everyone told her to plant. She would plant her father's corn. She would plant the Crimson King, all 160 acres of it. It was a risk that bordered on madness, and the first person to tell her so was a man who liked her, a man who respected her father, a man who was just trying to help. His name was Frank Henderson. He managed the local grain cooperative. The co-op was the center of the farming community. It was the place you sold your grain, the place you bought your seed and fertilizer, the place you heard the news. Frank was a good man, deacon at his church, coached Little League for 20 years. He had known Sarah since she was a little girl. He had served with her father on the county board. In late summer, Sarah went to see him. She brought a small bag of her father's corn. She put it on the counter of his dusty office. "Frank, I'm planting this next spring. I wanted to make sure you'd take it at harvest." Frank picked up the bag. He let the kernels run through his fingers. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the strange, colorful corn. He looked at the determined young woman in front of him. "Sarah," he said. His voice was gentle. He sounded like a father talking to a child. "Your dad was a brilliant man, one of the smartest I ever knew. But this was his hobby. This isn't a commercial crop." Sarah stood her ground. "It's good corn, Frank. It's tough." He nodded. "I'm sure it is. But the yield, Sarah, the yield is too low. You'll never cover your costs. And the moisture content will be all over the place. The test weight will be inconsistent. I can't mix this in with the number 2 yellow everyone else is growing. It would bring the grade down for the whole silo. It would hurt every other member of this co-op. I can't do that to them." He pushed the bag back across the counter. His eyes were full of genuine concern. "I'm not going to be the man who helps Thomas Thorne's daughter go bankrupt. I can't take this corn." Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by someone who genuinely believed they were protecting you. Someone who used the language of care to place a limit on you. Certainty delivered with kindness is a cage without bars. You can't fight it with anger. You can't argue against its logic. It doesn't see you as a threat. It sees you as a child who needs saving. There is no quiet fury like the one that builds inside you in that moment. Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that. That feeling of being kindly, gently, reasonably told what you are not capable of. Because that is the moment a story truly begins. Sarah took the bag of corn. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at him. A quiet, steady gaze. She said, "Thank you for your time, Frank." And she walked out. Frank Henderson watched her go. He shook his head slowly. He felt a pang of sadness. He was sure he had done the right thing. He was sure he had just saved that young woman from herself. He was a certain man, and certainty is a powerful blindness. Sarah drove home. The truck rattled on the gravel road. The bag of corn sat on the passenger seat. Junk corn. The words echoed in her head. She pulled into her driveway. She sat in the truck for a long time. The sun was setting over the fields, her father's fields. She could feel the weight of 4 generations. The doubt was a physical thing, a cold knot in her stomach. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe this was foolish. Maybe she should just sell. She got out of the truck. She went inside the house. The smell of old books and dust and her father's pipe tobacco still lingered. She walked to his desk. She opened the journal again. To that last page. The dirt remembers what we have forgotten. She read the words over and over. It wasn't a lament. It was an instruction. The dirt was the one thing they hadn't taken. The bank didn't own the soil itself. The co-op didn't control what grew in it. The dirt was hers. That night, she made another decision. If the co-op wouldn't take her corn, she would find someone who would. She would not ask for permission again. She would not seek approval. She would create her own market. Self-sufficiency was no longer a goal. It was the only path forward. The next morning, she started. She spent the winter in the local library. This was before the internet. This was microfiche and card catalogs. She read agricultural history books. She studied old seed company catalogs from the 1920s. She learned about the grains that built America, before the hybrids, before the commodities markets. She learned that corn like hers, flint corn, high in oil and protein, it wasn't grown for yield. It was grown for nutrition, for flavor, for one industry in particular, distilling. Old-style bourbon and whiskey makers prized these grains. They gave the final product a character you couldn't get from commodity corn. An oily mouthfeel, a complex sweetness. Most of those distilleries were gone, but a few were starting to come back. Small craft operations, people who cared about ingredients. She made a list. She wrote letters, dozens of them, by hand. She included a small sample of the Crimson King in each envelope. Weeks went by. Most didn't reply. A few sent polite rejection letters. Then, one day, a letter came. From a new distillery, 3 states away. A man named Julian Vance. The letter was short. It said, "Your corn is interesting. I'm not making any promises, but if you grow it, I'll come see it at harvest." It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a guarantee. It was a sliver of a chance. For Sarah, it was enough. That spring, she planted 160 acres of Crimson King. She did it alone. Her neighbors watched her. They saw the strange, dark seed going into the ground. They talked at the diner. They shook their heads. A shame what's happening to the Thorn place. Thomas must be rolling in his grave. She's going to lose it all. She heard the whispers. She ignored them. She worked from sunup to sundown, fixing the old planter, calibrating it for the odd-sized kernels. The corn came up. It grew strong and tall. The summer was hot and dry. A drought settled over the county. The neighbors' hybrid corn began to suffer. The leaves curled. The stalks drooped. Sarah's corn stayed green. Its deep roots, a trait her father had bred into it, found moisture deep in the soil. The dirt was remembering. Come harvest, her fields were a sea of crimson and green, while others were reporting disappointing yields. Her crop was exactly what she expected, 100 bushels to the acre, low but alive. Then she faced her next problem, the combine. Her father's old John Deere 6600 was set up for yellow dent corn. The Crimson King's stalks were thicker. The cobs were a different shape. It would chew it up. She couldn't afford a new machine. She went to see Gus, an old mechanic who ran a repair shop on the edge of town. Gus was a man of few words and greasy hands. He had been friends with her father. She explained the problem. Gus chewed on a toothpick. He looked at the old combine. He looked at a cob of her corn. He said, "Your dad was a stubborn man. Looks like you are too. Leave it with me." For a week, he worked on it. He and Sarah, side by side. He showed her how to weld, how to modify the cylinder speed, how to adjust the concave clearance. They fabricated new parts from scrap metal. They didn't modernize it. They made it older. They made it work like a machine from the 1940s. A machine built for a different kind of corn. When they were done, Gus wiped his hands on a rag. He didn't ask for money. He said, "Your dad helped my wife when she was sick, paid a hospital bill we couldn't. He told me not to tell anyone. Now we're even." Sarah harvested her corn. The modified combine worked perfectly. She filled the old grain bin behind the barn. 16,000 bushels of junk corn. Then she waited. A week later, a car drove up her lane. A man in a clean shirt and city shoes got out. He introduced himself as Julian Vance. He was young, ambitious. He looked at the farm. He looked at Sarah. She wasn't what he expected. He walked into the field. He picked a stalk. He broke an ear of corn in his hands. He smelled it. He chewed on a raw kernel. He didn't say a word for 10 minutes. He just looked and touched and thought. Finally, he turned to her. "The co-op won't take this, will they?" Sarah shook her head. "No." He nodded. "Good." He walked over to the grain bin. He took a sample. He ran it through a small portable tester. He looked at the numbers. He looked at her. He said, "I'll pay you 3 times the market price for number 2 yellow, for every bushel in that bin. Cash." Sarah felt something in her chest give way, a knot she had been carrying for a year. She just nodded. He said, "And I want a contract for next year. Double the acreage. I'll give you a down payment, right now." Sarah found her voice. It was quiet, but it was steady. "I don't need a down payment. I'll plant it. You pay me at harvest." Julian Vance looked at this young woman, covered in dust, standing in front of a pile of corn nobody else wanted, and he understood. This wasn't about money for her. This was about something else. He stuck out his hand. "At harvest, then." They shook on it. A new partnership was born, not in a boardroom, but in a dusty farmyard, over a grain that the world had labeled junk. And that was the beginning. Because this is where the story stops being about one harvest and starts being about decades. Let me tell you about the next 30 years. 1989. Sarah planted her 160 acres, and she leased the 160 next door. She paid for the lease, cash. Julian Vance bought the whole harvest, 32,000 bushels. He paid her on the spot, cash. 1990. She bought that 160 acres. The owner was retiring. She didn't go to the bank. She walked into his kitchen. She made him an offer. She paid him, cash. Frank Henderson at the co-op heard about it. He thought it was a fluke, a one-time deal. He told people she got lucky. 1992. The distillery Julian Vance owned won its first gold medal. The tasting notes from the judges mentioned a unique sweetness, a lingering, complex finish. They credited the mash bill, the corn. Julian sent Sarah a copy of the award, with a bonus check. She used it to buy a new tractor, a John Deere 4455. She paid for it, cash. 1995. Julian's distillery was expanding. He needed more of the Crimson King. He asked Sarah if she could grow more. She said, "I need more land." That winter, a 300-acre farm on her southern border went up for auction. The big corporate farm was there. They were ready to swallow it up. Sarah walked into the auction hall. She didn't say a word. She just kept her hand up. The corporate man looked at her. He saw a small-time farmer. He underestimated her. He stopped bidding. She bought the farm. The whole room went quiet when the auctioneer asked how she would be paying. She looked him in the eye. Cash. By 2000, she was farming over 600 acres. She was the distillery's exclusive supplier. She had no debt. None. Her equipment was paid for. Her land was paid for. She didn't answer to a banker. She didn't answer to a board. She answered only to the dirt, and to the man who saw treasure where others saw junk. Her neighbors stopped whispering. Now they watched. They saw the new grain bins going up, taller than the co-ops. They saw the semi-trucks with the distillery's logo rumbling down the gravel roads. They saw her prosperity, and they didn't understand it. She was breaking all the rules. Low yield, no fertilizer, no pesticides. Her input costs were a fraction of theirs. Her price per bushel was triple. The math didn't make sense to them. Frank Henderson watched too. He would drive past her farm on his way home. He saw the neat rows, the clean fields, the quiet, steady expansion. He remembered that day in his office. He remembered the bag of corn. He remembered his own certainty. He felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't regret, not yet. It was confusion, a crack in the foundation of what he knew to be true. He had been so sure, so kind, so wrong. In 2010, the world of craft spirits exploded. Suddenly, everyone was talking about heritage grains, terroir, provenance. The things Sarah's father had written about in his journals. The things she had been practicing for over 20 years. Julian Vance's distillery was no longer a small operation. It was a major brand, known for its quality, known for its story. And the story was about the corn, the Crimson King. A major liquor conglomerate came calling. They wanted to buy Julian's brand. He was getting older. He was ready to sell. But he had one condition. The deal had to protect his supplier. He insisted on a 30-year ironclad contract for Sarah Thorne, at the same price formula he had always paid her. The conglomerate agreed. They knew the corn was the magic. Overnight, Sarah's farm went from a successful niche business to the foundation of a national brand. The new owners wanted to expand. They wanted more corn than she could possibly grow. They asked her if she could find other farmers to grow the Crimson King for them, under her supervision. Sarah thought about it. She thought about the neighbors who had whispered, the community that had doubted. She thought about Frank Henderson. She said yes, but she had conditions of her own. She would select the farmers. She would teach them how to grow it. They had to follow her methods. Sustainable farming, no chemicals, and she would negotiate the price for all of them. She was creating her own co-op, a co-op built around the very corn the original co-op had rejected. The irony was not lost on her, but she never spoke of it. She didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. She chose 5 young farmers, people struggling to make ends meet, people on the verge of losing their family land. She gave them the seed. She taught them the methods. She guaranteed them a market. She gave them a future. And that brings us back to 2018, to the room with the reclaimed barnwood, and the man who had just discovered a treasure. After Julian Vance bought her entire harvest, after the conglomerate signed the deal, the demand for Crimson King corn skyrocketed. The 5 farmers Sarah had chosen were not enough. The company needed 10 times the supply. The new regional manager for the conglomerate, a young man with an MBA and sharp suit, he was tasked with sourcing it. He did the logical thing. He went to the biggest agricultural hub in the county, the grain cooperative. He walked into the office of its longtime manager, Frank Henderson. Frank was older now. His hair was white. He was a few years from retirement. The co-op was struggling. Low commodity prices, shrinking margins. Consolidation was killing small operations like his. The young manager put a sample of Crimson King on Frank's desk. The same colorful kernels Sarah had shown him 30 years ago. He said, "We need this. As much as you can get. We will pay a significant premium. This could be a lifeline for your members." Frank Henderson stared at the corn. It was like a ghost from his past. He had spent 3 decades telling his members to plant for yield, to chase the commodity market. He had told them corn like this was junk, a hobby. He had staked his reputation on that certainty. He looked at the young manager. His voice was barely a whisper. "We don't have this. Nobody around here grows this." The young man was confused. "But the biggest supplier is right here. A farm owned by Sarah Thorne. You must know her." Frank couldn't look at him. He just stared at the kernels. "I know her." The manager pressed him. "So you can talk to her? Organize the growers?" "This contract could save your co-op, Mr. Henderson." Frank finally looked up. The certainty was gone from his eyes, replaced by something else, a deep, quiet weariness, the look of a man who has just understood the scale of his mistake. He said, "Sarah Thorne won't sell her corn through this co-op." The manager asked, "Why not? Is there bad blood?" Frank shook his head. "No, nothing like that. It's simpler. 30 years ago, she brought this corn to me. She asked me to buy it, and I told her no. I told her it was junk." The office was silent. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to grow louder. The young manager didn't know what to say. Frank stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the massive grain silos filled with number 2 yellow dent corn, a commodity whose price was falling every day. He had built his career on being right, on being practical, on protecting his members from foolish risks. He had protected them all the way to the edge of ruin. He turned back to the young man. He said, "I think I need to go pay Ms. Thorne a visit." Frank's truck pulled into Sarah's lane a few days later. The lane was no longer gravel. It was paved. The farmhouse had a new roof, a new coat of paint. The barns were immaculate. Sarah was in her workshop, sharpening a blade. She saw his truck. She felt no triumph, no anger, just a quiet sense of the circle closing. She wiped her hands and walked outside to meet him. They stood there in the yard. 2 old people who had known each other their whole lives, their history hanging in the air between them. Frank was the first to speak. His voice was hoarse. "Sarah, the co-op is in trouble. The big company came to see me. They want your corn. They want us to be the supplier." He couldn't bring himself to ask the question directly. He just looked at her, a plea in his eyes. Sarah was quiet for a long time. She looked at the fields her father had left her, fields that were now the source of so much value. She looked at this man, this kind man, this decent man, who had tried to protect her, and in doing so had almost erased her father's legacy. She finally spoke. Her voice was not accusatory. It was not triumphant. It was just a statement of fact. A quiet devastation. 30 years ago, Frank, you told me my father's corn would bring down the grade for everyone. You said it would hurt the co-op." She paused. "It seems it's the only thing that could have saved it." She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. In that moment, Frank Henderson understood. The cost of his kindness, the price of his certainty. It wasn't about money. It was about vision. He had looked at that corn and seen a liability. Her father had looked at it and seen a legacy. Sarah had made that legacy real. He nodded slowly. He said, "I know." He got back in his truck, and he drove away. That was the last time they ever spoke about it. The reckoning was quiet, as it always is. The story doesn't end there. Sarah Thorne did not agree to sell her corn through the co-op. She couldn't. The trust was broken. But she did something else. She used the power the conglomerate had given her. She created a new model, the Thorn Heritage Grain Alliance. It was a network of dozens of small family farms, all growing Crimson King and other heritage grains. She provided the seed. She provided the training. She negotiated the contracts. She made sure the farmers, not the middlemen, got the premium price. She saved dozens of farms from bankruptcy. She created a new rural economy, one based not on volume but on value, on story, on the idea that the dirt remembers. The old co-op, Frank Henderson's co-op, it eventually went under. It was bought out by a larger agricultural services company. The silos that once held the uniform yellow corn of a dying commodity model. They now store the equipment for the corporate farm next door. A quiet monument to a world that has passed. Sarah Thorne is in her 70s now. She still lives on the farm. She doesn't work the fields herself anymore. Her daughter does, and her grandson. The 5th and 6th generations on that land. On her father's old desk, in the house with the new roof, sits a journal, his final journal. It's open to the last page. The ink is faded. The paper is soft with age. The dirt remembers what we have forgotten. Next to the journal sits a bottle of bourbon, the distillery's most expensive, highest-rated bottle. It's called Thorne's Crimson King. On the label is a small etching of her farm, the physical artifact of a life spent proving one kind man wrong. Right now, somewhere in the world, a young person with a new idea is standing in an office, and a good, kind, decent person in a position of authority is about to tell them no, is about to protect them from a risk, is about to save them from a foolish dream. The most dangerous limitation is the one imposed by someone who believes they are helping you. Because you cannot fight it with anger. You can only disprove it. With decades of quiet, relentless work, with a belief in the things the world has forgotten. The story of Sarah Thorne is not just about corn. It's about the gap between what you are capable of and what others have decided for you. If this story means something to you, if you've ever been in that gap, subscribe to this channel. We tell the stories for the ones who play the long game. Drop a comment and tell us about a time you had to prove a kind person wrong. And share this story with one person you know, someone who might be standing in that office right now, someone who needs to remember that the dirt, in the end, always remembers the truth.